Hello and welcome to Latveria Library, where I go through some of my favorite stories and characters in comics. Now I know the majority of you love the darker side of the DC universe like I do, so I figured we would dive a little more into that today with Mike Baron and Kelly Jones' miniseries, Deadman, Love After Death. Yes, there will be demons and ghosts, but really what makes this story interesting to me is the loneliness of being a dead superhero. Missing the warmth of someone else, and the lengths you will go to feel that once again. So like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy the content, and let's get into the video. For those of you who don't know, Boston Brand is a former trapeze artist, murdered by an unknown killer for no other reason than an initiation into a secret society of assassins. Afterwards, he was brought back as a ghost by the Hindu goddess Ramana Krishna to atone for his selfish life and catch his killer. But Brand's second chance as a ghost hero wasn't as great as it may sound. As much as he tried, Boston couldn't forget the warmth of being alive, the taste of a cold beer, the feeling of waking up after a nap, but most importantly, the love of a woman. The fact was, being a ghost was very lonely, and as the years went by, that feeling only got worse. Of course, he could take over other people's bodies, but it just wasn't the same. He couldn't form a lasting relationship or be himself. Plus, Boston felt like he was stealing time from the person. So he began a search for companionship, another ghost to make the days a little less lonely. But unfortunately, ghosts were rarer than you would expect. Boston spent years searching with no luck, and eventually in an act of desperation, turned to searching in the most reliable source, the National Enquirer, hoping to find any kind of haunting ghost story. Crazy enough, it worked. Boston found an article about a lumber baron named Byron Colby, who had built a circus right next to his house for his wife. She was a trapeze artist just like Boston. On the surface, Byron seemed like a pretty good husband, but underneath there was a darker side only his wife saw. The article states that he used to beat her. She tried to flee many times, but he would always find her, and apparently her final time, she fell from the balcony, or was pushed, and died the instant she hit the ground. Afterwards, the property was searched with no sign of Byron. He had seemingly disappeared. But ever since, a female figure has been seen wandering the grounds. Now, the place was in Wisconsin, according to the article, so Boston headed straight there, all while feeling silly like he was just chasing shadows. He arrived as the caretaker was leaving. The house was dusty and cluttered with circus memorabilia, complete with the in-house private gym, which is where he found the mistress of the house, even after death, practicing her routine. Deadman stood there and watched in silence until she happened to look over and see this unknown stranger watching her. Obviously startled, she slips and falls towards the pale stranger, but passes right through him, down into the room below. As she passed through him, Boston felt some sort of electric charge. It was the first thing he had felt in a long time, which he would have been more ecstatic about if he wasn't already surprised by the fact she was actually real. Boston then quickly phased through the floor after the beautiful performer. He swept through the long hallway, but she was nowhere to be found. Heading back upstairs, he turned his attention to the room next door to the gym. Boston assumed it was Byron's old study because it was filled with items revolving around the occult, including a book that seemed to be for summoning demons. Byron had a weird obsession with achieving eternal life through applied demonology. But before Boston could think on the matter, the ghostly performer appeared behind him, surprised as much as he was that he could see her, but also cautious because what were the odds of another ghost trapeze artist finding her? Convincing herself he was actually sent by Byron, she flees, leaving Deadman alone with his thoughts once more. But not for long. Boston had caught the attention of more than just a beautiful trapeze artist. To his surprise, a ghost claiming to be part of the circus appears with a warning. Leave now or join the circus. Stick around and you'll join a sideshow. Then you'll never leave. The tall apparition then turns and begins walking away. Deadman yells for him to come back, but it was like he wasn't even there. The tall spirit continued on, ignoring his pleas. So against Boston's better judgment, he decided to follow, hoping to get answers. As they trudged on, the two started to feel an unusual chill in the air. The chill gradually begins to get colder and colder, until it felt as if the two had slipped into a vat of acid. The pain was almost unbearable, and left as quickly as it come on. Boston kind of just shrugged it off and continued on through the forest after the unusual spirit, until he came upon a clearing that held Byron's abandoned circus. There were posters lining the wall outside of different freak show acts, which made it obvious to Boston why this place failed. It was 40 miles from civilization and nothing but a freak show act. The majority of this town probably didn't even know there was a circus here when it was open. Suddenly, there was a loud scream coming from the inside. He quickly rushed in to see a man, presumably Byron, holding the ghost of his wife by the hair. Boston yelled to leave her alone, but Byron does something he shouldn't be able to do and grabs Boston by the arm. Deadman was powerless. The man was far stronger than any mortal, which could have something to do with a partner he mentions named Brazia. The spirit of his wife then yells for him to let Boston go, that he was a ghost from the outside. Byron seems surprised by this, but nonetheless lets him go and scurries off. The beautiful performer was relieved for the moment, but knew it wouldn't last. She began to cry as she told Boston to leave, or else he would be trapped here like the rest of them. But he was more interested in why she was able to touch him, why she could make the trapeze move, something a ghost shouldn't be able to do. She explains that the Native Americans feared this place, said it was Brazia's land. Byron ignored their warnings and built his circus here anyway, eventually finding Brazia. He then killed everybody, and Brazia brought them back as spirits. His wife, being the last, was gifted with the ability to touch and move things to torment her, giving her just enough to always remember what she used to be, and the rest have been trapped here ever since. The two began to become closer after this, connecting through their shared loneliness. She wanting nothing more than to forget what she was, and Boston wanting it back more than anything. Temporarily, she shared her power with him, and it was like he was human again. He could feel her, feel his own weight. It was incredible. And for a while, the two just enjoyed life like they were the only two in the world. Being spirits, they would have nothing but time if it wasn't for Byron. He was calling her, and if she didn't go, he would give her to Brazia. Deadman wanted to help. He would do whatever it took to have more time with her, but it would take someone who was still alive to defeat the demon. The performer then tells of a comatose athlete at a hospital in Milwaukee. She had seen the report on the caretaker's TV. If Boston could possess that body, he could free her from the demons and Byron's grasp. So he wasted no time in tracking down the hospital. When he found the right room, the man's wife was there. Deadman could overhear her speaking with the doctor, discussing options, since there was little to no hope of him recovering. Boston hoped this was the right thing to do. He was essentially giving this woman false hope. But it was for a good cause, right? Saving the circus performers? Wishing he had more time to think it over, Deadman leaps into the comatose body, bringing it to life, shocking the nurses, doctor, and bringing the wife to tears. A little while later, after being begged to stay for a few more days by the doctor, just to make sure everything was in working order, Boston, who at the moment was Jack, and his wife arrived back home. He stayed with the wife for about 2 days, pretending to be Jack, sleeping in their bed, eating their food, deceiving this poor woman. It honestly felt kind of grimy. Boston had gotten way too comfortable inserting himself into this man's life. It really wasn't until he was paid a visit by Brazia himself, warning him not to come back to the circus, that he snapped out of it. Unfortunately, it was too dangerous to leave Jack's wife home. Brazia had attacked again the next night, so they both set out back to the circus in the middle of nowhere, this time having to slip the caretaker a 20 to let them tour the house, but probably wishing they didn't, because this time pinned down in the middle of the living room floor was an ape. Stomach ripped open, entrails spilled out onto the floor. Underneath the ape was a star with candles at each point, with words that looked to be some ancient language written off to the side. It was some sort of demonic ritual. Deadman moved in for a closer look when the ape comes alive, warning him to leave. Afterwards, behind him, the fortune teller prop opened to reveal a letter that read, "You stupid fool. Do you think the dead can't suffer?" Boston then rushed back to the car to check on Jack's wife. The smell was almost unbearable, so she had left. He finds her sobbing in the back seat. She had been through so much the past couple days, and Boston realized this was no place for her. so he decided to take her back to town. But first, he had a question for the caretaker, who had gone back to his trailer to call the police. Inside, the caretaker was nowhere to be found, but the place was trashed and had a foul odor. Off to the side, there was a TV that switched on by itself, startling our hero. The TV began to play an advertisement for Byron's circus until the end, when he broke character, accusing Boston of trying to steal his wife. He then said to meet him at the circus. Deadman tried his hardest to get the TV to shut off, finally in a fit of rage just putting his foot through the screen. The trailer was silent once more, but the awful stench was getting worse. Boston began to gag when he heard someone whisper "help me" from the corner of the trailer. He looked over to find a gigantic woman just finishing her meal, which happened to be the caretaker. The large woman was another one of the freak show acts haunting the property. Boston was frozen in place as she told her story of the good old days in the circus, until he remembered Jack's wife. Quickly he rushed outside, but unfortunately the large woman had gotten to her first. It was safe to assume the gigantic spirit sat on the car, completely crushing it flat. This was nobody's fault but Boston's. He got the woman involved out of his own selfish need to have some semblance of what he used to be, to feel anything again. Everybody else be damned. But the fact was, his time was up, and because of him, hers was too. He knew this, and was overcome with grief, which caused him to lose concentration, getting ejected from Jack's body. Luckily, the large woman didn't seem to notice. A second spirit had appeared in the form of a tiger, and the two were arguing over Jack's body. But while they were distracted, Boston was able to jump back in and break free of the large woman's clutches. He began to pray to Ram Kushna for help, with not so much as a peep from the Hindu goddess. Because unfortunately, there were no gods here, only Brazia, and he would be Boston's despair. Byron said this as he appeared from the shadow of the trees. He then told Deadman that Jack's wife was still alive, and Brazia had requested the pleasure of his company at 7 p.m. for cocktails. Before he could answer, Byron had disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Some time passes, and we find our hero trudging through the dark, creepy forest on his way to the circus. What he didn't know was he was being stalked. The undead tiger from earlier pounces from the tree line, catching Boston off guard. They struggle for a bit, and the tiger runs off. It was like Brazia was taunting him, making sure he knew he could take his life whenever he pleased. Things had really gotten bad for our hero, all in the name of love. But finally, we are about to get some good news. It would seem that all the spirits that haunt the grounds aren't exactly as loyal as Byron surmised. For the first time in 50 years, the spirits saw that they may have a chance to stop him. Reptilina, mistress of reptiles, approached slowly with this in mind. She tells our hero all she knew about the demon, starting with how he was a Native American deity. The tribe that worshipped him were shunned by all the other tribes, probably due to their praise of such an evil deity. The blood of this shunned tribe runs through Byron Colby, who under the guise of a simple traveling magician was in reality constantly searching for something that could elevate his powers. And he found it through Brazia. But this is where her help ends. Because of the curse, Byron knew where all his spirits were at all times, including the mistress of reptiles. As punishment for betraying him, Byron used her own python against her. It wrapped itself around her as she begged for mercy, swallowing her slowly until there was nothing left. Boston just stood there and watched in horror as it happened. We now fast forward a bit to Boston arriving at his destination. The first thing he saw was Reptilina, whose mind was now a slave to Byron. She was almost unrecognizable. She gestured our hero inside where the magician was waiting. He reassured Boston the snake woman was quite fine, but her soul belonged to him, as did all the other spirits, including Brazia, who was waiting for him on the other side of the circus. Byron bids Deadman farewell and disappears once again in a cloud of smoke. The circus was massive. It could take days to find Jack's wife or even Brazia himself, but as Deadman, he could scope out the entire place in no time. Jumping out of Jack's body, he began his hunt, and even after being distracted by another undead tiger attack, he still was able to track down Jack's wife to the Goat-Faced Boy's trailer. But little did he know, it was a trap, and Connie was the bait. The Goat Boy had Boston right where he wanted him, grabbing and throwing him through the trailer wall. but Boston wasn't quite out for the count. Finding a mallet, he continuously smashed the goat boy's head until the body stopped twitching. A feeling of horror at what he had just done and relief washed over him all at once. His first test had been won, and Connie was safe, but it was starting to get dark, which is when the spirits would be most active. They needed to find a place to lay low until the morning, eventually coming upon some sort of an office. It had large sturdy doors and strong locks, so hopefully it would hold until the morning. Not that it really mattered for a ghost, but it would make Connie feel a little more safe. It would also give him a chance to leave Jack's body for a while and look for Anne, the beautiful performer, since it would look as if Jack was fast asleep. He floated from car to car until he came upon the circus train engine, which reminded him of what the spirit of the fortune teller had told him earlier. That Brazia lives in the engine. Motion and heat are his weaknesses. So much had been going on that he almost forgot. But while he was lost in thought, Anne had actually found him first. She explains that if he's going to take on Brazia, he needed to do it now, because when the sun comes up, he would be trapped here with the rest of the performers forever. Unfortunately, Jack's body needed more time to rest. He pushed it a little hard last time he had used it, and if he was too exhausted to face his opponent, all this would be for nothing. So they tried to kill a little time while the body recovered. Anne introduced Deadman to some of her friends from the circus, then spent the rest of their time in Anne's old trailer until about a little after midnight. Spending time with her again helped him remember what he was fighting for all this time. He was ready now. Jack's body wasn't at 100%, but it would have to do. He grabbed a can of kerosene that was in the trailer and circled around through the forest. He guessed the magician should be dealt with first since he was kind of the puppet master and probably more dangerous. So Boston crept in through the back of the car, not making a sound. Byron was sitting at his desk, back was turned in the opposite direction, and yet, still he knew his adversary approached. Instead of fighting, Byron tried to reason with Bran. He told him he was just the last in a long list of lovers his wife has had. She was using him for her own ends. But it was hard for Deadman to believe any of it, obviously. Nonetheless, Byron continued. He said she had been with the entire circus. The clown, the strongman, the fortune teller. It was the reason he killed her in the first place. Anne's only goal was revenge. Any affection towards Boston was just to get back at her husband. And now he has doomed not only himself, but the couple he had dragged into this. Whether if it was true or not, it threw Deadman off his game. He began losing control of Jack's body. As he tried to regain that control, it left him wide open for Byron. Pulling a bullwhip from his trench coat, he started to whip Boston over and over again. Eventually, there was a break in the whipping. It was only for a second, but it was all that Boston needed. He quickly lunged towards his opponent, getting in a pretty good shot to the face, which caused Byron to loosen his grip on the whip. Our hero noticed this, grabbed the whip and wrapped it around his neck. It was over. The rest of the spirits would handle him from there, and with an I love you to Anne, he headed towards the engine to finish this. Luckily, there was still some coal left, so he loaded it all into the furnace and lights a match, but it stopped at the last minute by Brazia himself. He began taunting Boston, basically telling him what Byron did about Anne, but really trying to break his spirits this time, saying nobody could ever love him, and he was foolish to think otherwise. Anne would do anything to be rid of them, even use Boston and the trainers. Brazia offered him mercy. All he had to do was pour the kerosene he had brought over himself. He would be doing Jack a favor. The guy was a vegetable anyway. Boston seemed completely broken at this point, and agreed. But suddenly, through the engine window swooped Anne, kicking the kerosene into the furnace. Boston then lights it, and the two work together to get the train moving again, crashing it through the mansion, then riding it all the way off the cursed land. Finally, Brazia was gone, and the spirits including Anne were free, but she still had a confession to make. What Byron and Brazia had told him were somewhat true. Anne did use Boston to set herself and the other circus performers free. In fact, they had already moved on. Anne was only able to remain due to her powers. Boston begged her to stay, but she could already feel her spirit slipping away. How long would she even last here? A week? Maybe 2? No, she wanted to go. She wanted to finally rest. But what about Boston? When would his never-ending death finally end? When would he find peace? After everything, was this his prize? To have being able to feel again dangled in front of him just for it to be taken away again. It was almost too much to bear. Anne apologized and hoped that he would find some comfort in the fact she was able to bring Jack out of his coma. But it made it worse. Seeing them so happy reminded him of how lonely he is and would be for what would probably be eternity. Anne then gave him one last kiss and disappeared, leaving him the way we started this story, alone. I hope you all enjoyed this story. It's incredibly sad. I know we're supposed to feel bad for Boston, but it's honestly pretty hard to, what with him dragging Jack and his wife into his mess, and almost getting them killed or worse, trapped forever in the circus. But I would love to know what everybody else thinks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and if you want and have the means to, donate if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next.